I just couldn't get my experience out of it, and I realized I had like shifted from academics to culture. So I think you like yesterday's whole thing narrowed me into the way things, you know, feel before you even dive into that.
Yeah, it's a good point. Climate's how we feel. And it's the things we actually do to promote a sense of feeling. Unlike culture, where you're influencing people and conditions, climate you actually do work on climate. Things like plugging in the cookie smell, call it fragrance thing. It's something you specifically do. You're very intentional about it, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And so each of you, by the end of the day, is going to come up with these statements about, you know, your way of doing something at your school. And yesterday, when we were closing, Mark made this point very well. There's a shift happening on CMO level and at your building levels where you're taking, like, remember that image I gave you yesterday of being a corporate outlet or an owner-operator? So going to owner-operator, really kind of figuring out how you make it your own, but still within that rubric, right? So you're going to develop your own way around 4 facets of school climate. And similar to the culture statement, I'm going to have you write your way about it. You're going to write your way about safety, and you're going to write your way about something. It's going to be, and we're going to like value the complexity in these, but go for simple, right? It should pass the grandma test as well. From your our way statements, and I'll show you this a little bit later, you're going to be able to specifically say how you're going to address different facets. I'm going to walk you through that. But this is really important. When you go into high-functioning systems, there's a way that things are done. You go into the Ron Clark Academy. Every day there's a way that students come into the building. And it reinforces the culture, and it helps build the climate at the same time. And it's celebratory, right? Do you remember that bungee jumping thing? Well, all the kids meet that's actually in the library. And it's a ritual, it's part of a celebration. But imagine starting your day off with, I mean, they're middle schoolers, they're already active. Imagine starting the day off, like feeding into the activity versus trying to keep it down. And what Ron said is like, look, the second middle school kids, and so these are 11 to 13 year olds, the second that middle school kids come to school, they want to move. The last thing they want to do is sit down. And so he said, so we built this bungee thing, and certain kids get to go in the bungee thing, and they all have this goal of trying to touch the top of the ceiling. Everyone tries to do it, and he's made it just a little bit impossible to get there, but they all try it, right? And the fact of the matter is, as kids get older, it's easier to get to the top because they weigh more, they have a little bit more dexterity. It's very creative and extremely intentional about how to do it. Does that. Now, I'm not saying you have to kind of put in a bungee jump, but it does go back to his way. There's a way that kids come into the school. There's a way that they greet people. And that all has a lot of thinking behind it, and that's what we're going to get to today. Okay. All right, so real quick, I think you have this definition in your handouts. If you don't. School climate is, who wants to read this?
School climate, the quality and character of school life based on patterns of students, parents, and school personnel's experience of school life, and reflects the norms, goals, values, interpersonal relationships, teaching and learning practices, and organizational structures.
Yeah, what does that sound like? What did we talk about yesterday? Oh, edubabble, like this is at its finest, right? This is a textbook definition. Similar to what we did yesterday, you're going to have to make this your own, but we're not going to go through that process because you already could go through that process by yourself. You know, the only thing I want you to take away between school culture and school climate, definitionally, is that you influence culture, usually through people and how you and what you do, okay? And you actively build the climate. Certain things that, and it goes back to your way, you apply your way to certain dimensions of school climate. We'll talk about these dimensions just a moment, okay? So remember, remember, as the chief influencer in the school around culture, you're really influencing. In climate, you're actually going to build. And it's important because one of the chief things about climate that we're all very, very concerned about, and that we have to be, especially in this day and age, is around safety. And the safety of your personal safety, that of your staff, and especially that of your students. So we have to be very, very deliberate. I don't want you to just influence school staff. You're going to be safe today, right? You actually build in the structures to do that. And school climate is about these enabling structures rather that make these things happen. That makes sense? Yeah. Okay. Good. All right. So.
Talked about you have to build structures for school safety.
As it relates to climate, as it relates to, and what do we do with culture?
Culture, we influence culture.
Gotcha. Perfect. All right. We're all good. So one of the things Galande says that are parts of a system is you got to be able to recognize success and failure. We're data crazy in education right now, but we're not information rich. Think about that for a second. We're data crazy, but not information rich. The reason why we collect data is to get information, and that information informs our actions. Data, in and of itself, does not inform our action. It's the information that we gather, right? And it's something that we kind of skip over. We skip over it in healthcare, we skip over it in education, we skip over it in lots of fields because we've been so crazy about trying to get the data that that's become the work. The work is the information. It's from when you analyze the data, that information goes to action. Data doesn't go to action. Make sense? And so one of the things, and this is really important because we have data dialogues and all that kind of stuff, we should be really having information dialogues at the end of the day. We used to run this procedure in District of Columbia Public Schools called SchoolStat. It comes from a similar effort called CrimeStat in New York City. So in New York City, when crime rates were just really, really high, they brought in a set of data analysts, and they're called big data analysts. And they looked at all the data and they started to say, you know, there are things you could do to bring down the murder rate that have nothing to do with removing guns and drugs off the streets. There are other things you could do. You could clean up, and you could fix abandoned buildings, all these kinds of things. And so they started to stat every single, pothole, every single nuisance that was there. And what people started to see is that there was government in action, and these things started people were getting more visibility, and they noticed that they were taking the information and they were doing something with it. We have this thing called SchoolStat when I was in DC, and this was I loved it. Most of my colleagues hated it. So all the cabinet would sit around here, the superintendent, chancellor, she'd be there, and we would present our data. And my special education data was almost always about like who's going to jail, all that kind of it was about these court cases and stuff, timeliness of IEPs, and we statted it, right? We had all this data, and then the chancellor was like, the numbers are wrong. What we missed in that conversation, probably 80% of the time, was the information. If you looked at the backstory, it was taking staff several hours to actually collect the data that went to SchoolStat, that we had a conversation about data points and not about the information that was coming out of it, right? And so one of the things when you have data dialogues, if you're spending more than 20% of your time on actually collecting the data, if data collection becomes the work, almost always information never happens. So you want to figure out, as it relates to school climate, how are you going to get data around school climate? It's hard to measure, quantify school culture, but because you're doing deliberate actions around climate, you can measure those. Okay? It's very different. You could measure school culture, mostly qualitatively. But if you wanted some hard numbers, it's easier to do here, okay? But remember, it's not about the data, it's about information.
I'm kind of stuck on your example of
Yeah.
when you were presenting data to your superintendent.
Yeah.
When she said that it's wrong, can you clarify that? Like, where were you and your team going wrong, or where was the disconnect? Just because you're saying, if we're, data crazy, data rich, and
Information poor.
So
Yeah.
I need to connect that.
Yeah, so it feels like you're doing something when you're collecting data.
Sure.
It feels like, oh, I'm accomplishing something. I'm starting to, like, I have suspension data. I have attendance data, right? That's fine. You're just describing a problem. That's all that does. It doesn't get to the point of creating information that actually helps you solve it. That's the more important part.
And that's what the superintendent was trying to
Yes.
push.
Yeah. She was like, great, you have all this, I see this, but, why? What's the information that we've gleaned, right? And so if you're in data conversations with teachers, and you're not, and this goes back to the simplicity, complexity problem, right? If you haven't kind of unpacked the complexity around data and information together, you get simple things like, we're gonna talk about like curriculum-based measures without actually understanding what goes into the CBM and the information produced. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yes.
So I would say if you're you gotta assess this for yourself. Like, I don't presume that everyone's information poor, but generally, if you're data rich and information poor, that has to change, especially as it relates to teaching and learning and school climate, right? So just think for a moment, just assess for yourself. What do you think?
That's what Mr. Spencer's been talking about forever.
Who's Mrs. Spencer? Oh, sorry.
Just, making sure that we not only have the data, but we use it, and making sure that the teachers understand it, the kids understand that this is what I am now, this is where I need to go, so it's just full circle.
Full circle. Yep. Yes. Arnett?
One of the things I've learned over the years, particularly as it relates to teachers, a lot of the teachers have the data, they just don't know what to do with it. And so they don't know what that execution looked like. They don't know how to take this information that I know for sure and translate it into something that equates to results.
Let me give you a perfect analog to that your teachers may understand, right? Most of us could walk into Walgreens, CVS, Rite Aid, and you go and they have the blood pressure check, or maybe you have one at home, you can check your blood pressure. You don't know what those numbers, you get two numbers, right? Become a fraction, tell you your health, right? If you don't know what to do with a high rating, all you've done is collected data, right? You've done nothing to help yourself, especially if you have high blood pressure, right? You don't know that 120 over 70 is actually normal range, or if you don't know like what 120 means versus what 70 means, that's what, if you get that, that's data collection. You can do that. If you don't know what it means, you don't have the information to actually help. So I agree with you. Exactly right. But as it relates, and why I'm focusing on that is, as it relates to climate, it's so easy to start to collect attendance data. It's so easy to start to collect data around school-wide discipline and all that kind of stuff without getting back to yourself about like, okay, what is the information here? Because that's going to go to your solution. Without clear solutions, it's hard to implement. Most implementation falls apart because the solution or what you're trying to implement is very unclear. There's another big reason about why it falls apart too that we'll talk about tomorrow. Okay? So, how will we get information about school climate? There are any number of school climate surveys available to you for free. I'm going to show you one in just a moment. You can actually contact these people, and the reason why they'll offer it to you for free or very, very little cost is they actually need a lot of respondents because they're trying to create more information around school climate. The reason why I really like this survey in particular, and there's another one that I'll tell you about later. It's called Youth Truth. Has anyone used Youth Truth before? Yeah. Now, Youth Truth is the gold standard around school climate because they administer the survey, and then they'll come and talk to you and your students about it, right? And it's all student-based. So students know the climate better than any adult in the building, right? We can believe that. So, so we'll talk about Youth Truth later. But here's a school climate study. I printed it out for you, but this is all online, and you can start to take it and go and talk to them. We called them up and said, hey, could we share this survey with you? And they said, sure. And what they wanted me to make sure I said to you is that, hey, would you have them go visit our site just in case they'd like to use this with their own? And the reason why is because we're doing a research study, and this will help them assess climate, but it'll help us start to create information about school climate. So that's what this is. The other reason I really, really like this survey is it uses results, very clear, plain, grandma-tested language around their domains. Like, so for example, in physical appearance, and if you read most of the statements, like, you know, it's welcoming to outsiders, the school projects its identity to visitors, right? You can kind of wrap your head around that. And what I'd like for you to do as you go through this school survey, you're going to work in groups of 2 and 3 as you go through this, is think less about assessing your climate right now, and think about what type of information you could start to collect based on think about the information that you could get based on this survey. The other thing is, when we start to get nitty-gritty about where you're going to start with climate, some of these statements are exactly the result that you want, right? So for example, you might say one of the outcomes of physical appearance in 1D is there's no litter, right? And that may be something you work with custodial staff on. Like, that's their goal, no litter, very clear, right? Another one is, okay, welcoming to outsiders. You may want to do that. Each one of these statements has been empirically validated as being a factor that can influence school climate. That's the other good thing I like about this. So they made a choice to ask about litter because litter actually matters. A welcome signage actually matters. So these are things that you might want to consider. And so as you're thinking about, okay, here are the things I'd like to see in place, these are the actual things that you can start to put. It's like, all right, we're going to start to tick some of these off. All right, here's what I'd like for you to do. You're going to work in groups, and feel free to go anywhere, close out here, but to have real conversations. I'd like for you to read through each of the questions here, and circle the ones that are outcomes that you would like to see in your school. And just like we did yesterday, prioritize them. You can't do all of them, but under physical appearance, what are the top 3 things that you'd like to see within the first 90 days of your school? Right? All of them we'd like to do, but we can't do all of them. So just prioritize. And you're going to do that. You're going to read through all of these as you go through. And so the way this will work is you'll spend for each section, spend 3 minutes reading through the items, circle the ones that make sense to you that you'd like to focus on, and then have a short discussion about those items. Okay, you're going to go through them. This is going to take about 45 minutes to do. And then when you come back, we'll start to dig into actually how you're going to make these items and the other factors of school climate work. Okay? Any questions? Someone want to repeat back the directions?
To read through each section and pick out your top 3, top 3.
In each section,
in,
yep.
In each section, and then have discussions around that.
Great. Yeah. All right. Okay, so let's 10:45. Let's be back here, ready to talk about them. Okay. All right. And do feel free to move out of the room and work together.
I think you have unique perspectives.
building, put you under in my head.